The 10,000-seat arena fell into graveyard silence because Elvis had stopped. Mid-sentence. Mid-note. The king of rock and roll, standing center stage in his white jumpsuit, had simply stopped. His hands trembling. His voice gone. The spotlight catching tears that shouldn't have been there. And in that moment, something was happening that no one in that Memphis crowd would ever forget. The date was August 16, 1977. Elvis Presley's final concert. But nobody knew it yet. What they were about to witness wasn't just a performance. It was a man's soul breaking open on stage, triggered by a letter that changed everything. A letter from a mother whose world was ending. A letter that found its way into Elvis's dressing room just minutes before he walked into those lights for the last time. But to understand why the king stopped singing that night, we need to go back 3 hours earlier, to a moment that would define not just this concert, but Elvis's entire legacy. It was 5:30 p.m. at the Mid-South Coliseum in Memphis. Elvis sat in his dressing room, the familiar pre-show ritual playing out around him. The gold scarves laid out in perfect rows. The jumpsuits hanging like armor waiting for battle. The smell of hairspray and cologne mixing with the distant sound of fans gathering outside. Charlie Hodge, Elvis's longtime friend and stage companion, knocked on the door. "Boss, we got about 2 hours. You feeling good tonight?" Elvis nodded, but something was different. There was a weight in his eyes that hadn't been there during the afternoon sound check. He'd been quieter than usual, more contemplative. The band had noticed it too, the way he'd held notes longer during rehearsal, the way he'd paused between songs like he was trying to remember something important. "Charlie," Elvis said, his voice softer than usual. "You ever think about why we do this? Really do this?" Charlie had known Elvis for over a decade. He'd seen him through the Army, through the comeback special, through the Vegas years. But this question caught him off guard. "What do you mean, boss?" Elvis gestured toward the arena beyond the walls. "All those people out there. They come looking for something. Magic, maybe. Hope. Something bigger than their everyday lives." He paused, staring at his hands. "Sometimes I wonder if we're giving them what they really need." Before Charlie could respond, a security guard knocked. "Mr. Presley? There's a lady outside who says she has something urgent for you. Been waiting since this morning. She's got a little girl with her." Elvis's first instinct was to decline. There were always people wanting to meet him, wanting something. But something in the guard's tone made him pause. "What kind of urgent?" She says her daughter is dying, sir. Cancer. The little girl asked if she could give you a letter before." The guard trailed off. The room went quiet except for the distant rumble of fans taking their seats. Elvis stood up slowly. In his career, he'd received thousands of letters, met countless families dealing with tragedy. But something about this felt different. Maybe it was the timing, his last show in Memphis, his hometown. Maybe it was the way the guard's voice had broken slightly when he mentioned the little girl. "Bring them back," Elvis said. Charlie looked concerned. "Boss, you know how these things go. Once you start. Bring them back, Charlie." 5 minutes later, the dressing room door opened again. A woman in her 40s entered, holding the hand of a small girl who couldn't have been more than 8 years old. The child was wearing a yellow dress that was too big for her tiny frame, and a knitted cap that couldn't quite hide the fact that her hair was gone. But her eyes were bright. Impossibly bright. And when she saw Elvis, she smiled with a joy so pure it seemed to light up the entire room. "Mr. Elvis?" she said in a voice that was barely above a whisper. "I'm Sarah. I wrote you a letter." Elvis knelt down so he was at eye level with her. "Well, hello there, Sarah. I'd be honored to read your letter." Sarah reached into a small purse and pulled out an envelope that had been folded and unfolded so many times it was soft as cloth. "I practiced writing it a lot of times. Mama helped me with the big words." Elvis took the envelope with the kind of reverence usually reserved for sacred texts. As he read, the room watched his face change. His jaw tightened. His eyes grew distant. And when he finished, he folded the letter carefully and looked back at Sarah. You know what this letter says, sweetheart? Sarah nodded. I told you that I'm probably going to heaven soon, and I wanted to ask you something special before I go. Elvis's voice was thick when he spoke. And what's that special thing? I wanted to ask if you could sing Amazing Grace for me tonight. Not the rock and roll version. The slow one. The one that sounds like a prayer. She paused, then added with 8-year-old seriousness. Because I think when people hear you sing it, they remember that God loves them. Elvis was quiet for a long moment. Behind him, Charlie and the security guard had gone completely still. Sarah's mother was crying silently, trying not to disturb this moment between her daughter and her hero. Sarah, Elvis said finally, that's exactly what I'm going to do. And I want you to have something. He walked to his dressing table and picked up one of his scarves, not one of the gold ones he threw to the crowd, but a simple white one he kept for himself. He tied it gently around Sarah's wrist. This is so you'll know, he said, that no matter what happens you're loved. By your mama, by God, and by everyone who hears your story. Sarah looked at the scarf, then back at Elvis. Will you remember me when I'm in heaven? Sweetheart, Elvis said, his voice breaking slightly. I'll remember you for the rest of my life. Subscribe now and leave a comment, because what happens next will change everything you thought you knew about the king. 2 hours later, Elvis walked onto that stage in Memphis for what would be his final performance. The crowd erupted as they always did, 10,000 people on their feet, screaming, reaching toward the man in the white jumpsuit who had changed music forever. But backstage, crew members noticed something different about Elvis that night. He'd been unusually quiet during the final preparations. He'd asked for his Bible to be placed on the small table beside his water glass, something he never requested before. And just before walking out, he'd done something that surprised everyone. He'd knelt down and prayed. The concert began like every other Elvis show. The band struck up. CC Rider. And the king exploded into performance mode, moving with that hip-swiveling energy that had scandalized America 20 years earlier. The crowd sang along, danced in the aisles, held up signs professing their love. For 90 minutes, Elvis was everything they wanted him to be. He was charming during Love Me Tender, electric during Hound Dog, soulful during Can't Help Falling in Love. He threw scarves, he kissed cheeks, he made middle-aged women feel like teenagers again. But as the show progressed, those paying close attention noticed something building in Elvis's performance. There was an intensity that went beyond showmanship. During How Great Thou Art, his voice carried a weight that seemed to pull the entire arena into reverent silence. During He Knows Just What I Need, he closed his eyes and sang like he was having a conversation with heaven itself. And then, near the end of the show, Elvis did something unprecedented. He stopped the music. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, walking to center stage. The band looked confused. This wasn't part of the usual set list, and Elvis rarely deviated from the established program. Before we finish tonight, I want to do something a little different. The crowd quieted, sensing that something special was about to happen. Earlier tonight, I met a little girl named Sarah. She's 8 years old, and she asked me to sing a song for her. Now, this isn't the kind of song you might expect at an Elvis Presley concert, but sometimes the most important things we do are the ones that surprise us. He gestured to the band. Charlie, I need you to come out here with your guitar. Just you. Charlie Hodge walked out with his acoustic guitar, looking puzzled but trusting. The stage, which had been blazing with colored lights and energy, suddenly felt intimate and sacred. This song, Elvis said to the crowd, is for Sarah. But it's also for everyone who needs to remember that they're loved, that they matter, that they're not alone in this world. And then, in a voice that was softer and more vulnerable than anyone had heard before, Elvis began to sing. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound, that saved a wretch like me. The arena, all 10,000 people, went completely silent. This wasn't the Elvis they knew. This wasn't the hip-shaking, crowd-pleasing performer. This was a man bearing his soul, singing with a purity and honesty that cut through every defense, every pretense, every barrier between performer and audience. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind but now I see. His voice cracked slightly on the word found, and that's when people in the front rows realized that Elvis was crying. Not the theatrical tears of a performer, but real tears. Raw tears. The tears of a man who understood exactly what those words meant, who had been lost himself, and was still finding his way back to grace. But then something happened that nobody expected. Elvis stopped singing in the middle of the second verse. The 10,000-seat arena fell into graveyard silence because Elvis had stopped. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, his head bowed, one hand covering his face. Charlie continued playing the guitar softly, unsure whether to stop or continue. The crowd held its breath, sensing they were witnessing something profoundly personal and sacred. When Elvis finally looked up, his face was wet with tears, but there was something else there too. A piece that hadn't been there before. A resolution. I need to tell you something, he said to the crowd, his voice barely audible through the sound system. This little girl, Sarah, she taught me something tonight. She reminded me why we're really here. He paused, looking out over the sea of faces. We're not here just for the music. We're not here just for the entertainment. We're here because sometimes, in this crazy world, we need to remind each other that love is real. That hope is real. That no matter how dark it gets, there's always a light waiting to guide us home. The arena was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. So I want everyone here to do something with me. I want you to finish this song. Not for me. Not for the show. But for Sarah, and for everyone like Sarah who needs to know they're not alone. And then, without another word, Elvis began singing again. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. But this time, he wasn't singing alone. One by one, voices from the crowd began to join in. Tentatively at first, then stronger. A woman in the third row. A man in the balcony. A group of teenagers who had come to see their idol and found themselves part of something much larger. How precious did that grace appear, the hour I first believed. By the time they reached the final verse, the entire arena was singing. 10,000 voices united in a song that transcended music and became something closer to prayer. Construction workers sang next to college professors. Grandmothers sang next to teenagers. People who had never spoken to each other were suddenly part of the same voice, the same hope, the same moment of grace. Elvis stood at the center of it all, no longer performing but participating. His voice blended with theirs, became part of theirs, as 10,000 people sang together. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing God's praise than when we'd first begun. When the last note faded, the silence that followed was unlike anything anyone in that arena had ever experienced. It wasn't the silence of an ending, it was the silence of a beginning. The silence of people who had just shared something sacred and were trying to hold on to it as long as possible. Elvis stood in that silence for a long moment, then spoke one final time. Thank you, he said simply. For Sarah. For me. For all of us who needed to remember tonight that we're loved. And then he walked off stage. He didn't come back for an encore. He didn't throw his final scarves. He simply left the stage, leaving 10,000 people to sit with what they had just experienced. Share this story and subscribe, because what Elvis did after this concert will leave you speechless. What the audience didn't know was that backstage, Elvis found Sarah and her mother waiting. He knelt down one more time to speak to the little girl who had changed his final performance. Did you hear us sing your song, sweetheart? He asked. Sarah nodded, her eyes bright with joy. It sounded like heaven. Elvis took off his necklace, a simple silver cross, and placed it around Sarah's neck. Every time you touch this, remember that you taught me why God gave me this voice. Sarah hugged Elvis with all her strength. When everyone was singing, I could feel how much love there is in the world. Sarah passed away 3 weeks later, holding the cross Elvis had given her. Elvis died just hours after that Memphis concert on August 16, 1977. His final performance had been a song about grace, shared with 10,000 voices that became one voice in the darkness. The white scarf and silver cross were buried with Sarah. But the song echoes still. Today, there's a plaque in the Mid-South Coliseum, in memory of Sarah Martinez and Elvis Presley, who showed us that the most beautiful music happens when hearts sing together. Elvis's 1684th performance wasn't a show, it was a prayer. A reminder that love wins, hope endures, and amazing grace can save us all.